Good morning, Galaxians, and welcome to another live episode of the Galaxy CDs Rocks and Flips Reseller Talk podcast. For those of you who might be new here, my name is Ryan, and I'm a full-time reseller, primarily dealing in books, and I get questions from time to time about books and bookselling terminology. So I thought we would spend some time just kind of going over some of those terms. And as I talked about last week when I introduced the show, which ones I use and which ones I don't. So to just kind of give you my overview philosophy, generally speaking, I always try to communicate in a way that I feel is the most clear to the most people possible. And with book terms, like with anything, with rocket science or human anatomy, there are terms of the trade that may not necessarily be well known by the casual citizenry. Our buyers are on eBay and Mercari, and they're not necessarily that well versed in this terminology. So I generally try to avoid overly technical terms. I'll give you an example. If I said to you in a listing, or just here right now, if I said to you boards are rubbed or boards have rubbing, would you immediately know what I mean by that? If you're a bookseller, you probably do. If you're not a bookseller, you might be confused. So I, in those cases, would use the terminology cover has shelfware. A lot of purists, bibliophiles, people who are really into books might think I'm a peasant for using that kind of terminology, but my goal is not really to necessarily appeal to that 1 or 2%. I'm not selling a lot of $1,000, $2,000 books to high-end collectors. I'm selling $8.99 1950s era science fiction books to people on eBay who are more broadly able to understand terms if I keep it simple. So let me know in the comments or in the chat if you're here today, what you think of that philosophy before we get stuck into these terms. A few good mornings. Lord Jake Ryan, thank you for being here as always. TRB Collectibles, good morning. So glad I could catch today's show. Normally I go sourcing today, but today turned into a listing day. I have my listing pile next to me and I'm ready for your live. I appreciate you coming out. And Media Picker, I'm here. Hey, Ryan. Thanks. I appreciate it. And as we discussed earlier via messages, your item is on the way. I appreciate the business. So with all of that said, let's get into some of these book terms. So I have linked already in the show description, the video description down below, to this site. This is a book term glossary that I'm going to use for this show. I'm not going to go over all of the terms. There are, gosh, I don't know. There's probably over 100 on here. We'd be here until this time next week trying to cover all of them, but I am going to hit the high points. And as I said in the comment that I left, if you have a particular term that you're hearing that you're a little unsure of and you'd like some clarity, leave it in the chat and I'll see if it's in here. And we can go from there. So let me get one thing changed here and let's get into this. So again, I'm not going to cover all of these. There are, bookmark this and you can go back and review it at your leisure, but I did highlight some ones that you might see on listings from other sellers that you might not necessarily be clear on. So here, this first one, all edges gilt. You may see it abbreviated AEG. And what that's referring to is the top, the front edge, what they call the foredge, and the footer of the book are all colored in gold. So they've got this gold shiny. You see it a lot on, particularly on Bibles and collectible books. So if you see that, gilt edges obviously just refers to the gold trim of those pages. All edges gilt. You will find books sometimes where it's just done on the top. So that's why there is this extra term. All edges stained, similar to gilt edges. All three edges are colored with some kind of decorative stain. You don't see this a ton today, but seems like particularly late 1800s and early 1900s, you'd see a lot of fancy multicolored staining on the book edges. That's a term that you will see used from time to time. This is one that causes some confusion, particularly I think on eBay. Antiquarian books. So they define it as a loose term implying collectible books rather than used books. Refers to old, rare, or out of print books. Some sellers say antiquarian books are published before 1900. eBay is not particularly clear on that, they will pretty much allow you to list anything in their antiquarian and collectible category. I had one I was listing yesterday that was from 2016 as I was doing research, and they had listed it as antiquarian and collectible. It probably qualified as collectible because it was a fairly unusual book, but eBay in particular is fairly lax with how they police this term. I try only to use it if I think the book is really collectible or is in fact really old. I think eBay in particular probably considers antiquarian interchangeable with vintage. So a lot of books from the 50s and earlier seem to end up in that category. I'm going to jump back over here to the chat really quickly about your vintage King James Bible on Mercari. Thanks for shipping. Thanks. I just actually sent that out, I think, this morning. It's the big something Gate edition. There's a really nice book shipped out in a box, just so you're aware. TRB Collectibles, I think it's a smart strategy. It opens up your potential sales market. At the end of the day, you understand who you're selling to, so you adjust your language to accommodate them. Yes, again, I don't want to run the risk of maybe 10 or 15% of my potential buyers clicking off of my listing because they don't understand what I'm trying to say. So I try to keep it as simple as possible. Continuing on here, some of these are more common. If you happen to have one again that you want to know about, let me know. Backstrip. This is the covering on the book spine. So if it's particularly a cloth or a hardcover, you'll see a lot of times those have faded or they have damage. And a lot of people, myself included, will generally just refer to that as damage or discoloration to the spine because I think in the common vernacular, most people view that particular edge of the book as just being the spine. They don't, the technical term for the spine is actually part of the binding, but this backstrip is actually what that piece is called. Binding, sometimes abbreviated as BDG. That's not an abbreviation that I would use because, again, I don't think most people would understand it. To cover the book surrounding the book block. So binding can be a paperback, a hardcover, a trade paperback, whatever it is that's bound the book together, essentially, is what they're referring to there. I see a lot of people, eBay in particular, again, has a designation for cloth bindings. I see the majority of people do not use that. They put them in as hardcovers. I do that generally as well. I don't think a lot of folks differentiate well, particularly on older books, again, between cloth and hardcover. The natural inclination of cloth would be that it's some kind of soft cover, not a cloth covering over a hard board. So I tend to err on the side of caution and call those hard covers. Boards, to go back to my initial example, those are the stiff binding materials for most modern books, and you could refer to it on older hardcovers as well. So that's the stiff part that is underneath some other type of covering, be it paper, cloth, leather, whatever. That's what that's referred to. I will generally use that term only in the case where there is some separation. So the spine has begun to pull apart at either the front or the back board, and you can see the board amongst the mesh where it started to pull away. And I will put that in the description and I'll use that term there. But that's about the only time that I use that particular one. Here's one that comes up a lot: Book Club Edition, sometimes abbreviated BC, most frequently abbreviated BCE. This is a separate edition of a book, usually printed especially for book clubs such as the Book of the Month Club, the Literary Guild. There was a double-day science fiction book club back in the day. They generally have Book Club Edition printed on the bottom right corner of the front flap of the dust wrapper. So if you're looking at the dust jacket and you open it up, that front flap that goes inside the cover, down on the lower right-hand corner, it will usually be stamped Book Club Edition. So that's one of the first clues. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, you buy books, particularly in bulk, that don't have the dust jackets, so they can be a little bit harder to identify. Occasionally, if the book club does not wish to do a separate edition, they will have a publisher blind stamp on the rear board and print a supply of dust wrappers without a price on the front flap, and now without the barcode on the rear panel. So that's another way to tell if the dust jacket does not have a price anywhere on it or a barcode, particularly for newer books. There's at least a decent likelihood that it is a book club edition. Book clubs, they note, are not solely an American phenomenon. There have been numerous British book clubs editions over the years. Those books, a lot of people look for those. They, generally speaking, don't have as much value as the original editions, but they can still bring big money. If you were with me a couple of weeks ago, I sold that early Stephen King novels book, the Bachman books, which was a book club edition, and it sold for over $100. So they can still be valuable. Generally speaking, they have less value than the regular book does. Book plate. This is a pasted in sign of ownership. Modern book plates are pressure sensitive, so they kind of peel and stick, as opposed to older book plates that were made with water activated adhesive, lick and stick. Gross. Some book plates from the 19th century were quite elaborate with engravings. There is a video here if you want to go see what those are, but these are just the stickers that a lot of collectors will put in their books, and then they put their name on them. This belongs to the library of whomever. You'll see that in a lot of books, and that is something that I generally will take a photograph of because it is kind of an alteration to the book. So in my listings, if I see one of these, I will put that at least in the photos. I probably won't mention it in the description, however. Bowed, a condition of the covers or boards of a hardcover book. Bowed covers may turn inward towards the leaves or outward away from the leaves. The condition generally results from a rapid change in the level of moisture in the air and is caused by different rates of expansion or contraction of the paste down and outer material covering the board. That's pretty technical. Generally speaking, I will just use the word warped. So if I see that the cover or the entire book is bending or folding in a way, I think warped is probably a more descriptive term and, again, a more easily understood term for most people. So I generally don't use the word bowed. I will use the word warped. You can let me know what you think of that. I'm going to jump back into the chat here real quick. Miss Lachey Resells, good morning, everyone. TRB Collectibles, quick good morning. Better Health Blessings, hey, thanks for coming out. And another hello. Feel free to exchange greetings and conversation in the chat as as you see fit. Continuing on here, chipped is one that you'll see pretty regularly, used to describe where small pieces are missing or where fraying has occurred on the dust jacket or the edge of a paperback. I will occasionally use this term, but I generally, again, will go for the more broad shelf wear or minor damage, depending on how much chipping is involved. Because again, it's a term, I feel like if I've got to look it up on a book's glossary, it's probably one that I'm not going to take the time to do. So I will defer to, again, a simpler term and just call it minor damage. And again, I put a lot of photos with my listings, and at the end of my descriptions, I always say as shown or as shown in photos, indicating that if people have further questions, they should go look at the copious amounts of photos that I've included with the listing. Cocked, also called shelf cocked, a condition resulting from storing book on a shelf so that it leans and rests against its neighbor or the side of a bookcase. Gravity deforms the book binding. Cocked can also refer to a book where the spine no longer remains at right angles to the covers. You see this a lot with older books, particularly if they have been collected and stored in boxes or Rubbermaid totes. If they're stored spine up in a tote or a box for a long period of time, gravity just naturally pulls the book itself against the binding of the spine and will cause the book to warp a little bit. Again, this is a case where I would likely use the word warped as opposed to cocked, just because it's more descriptive for a broader audience. Comb binding. This is one you see this a lot on like these community and church cookbooks. They're in this like plastic spiral, a book binding similar to spiral binding, but using a round tubular plastic with many teeth which fit through small holes, rectangular holes punched in the binding on the edge of the book. The plastic piece, if laid flat, would resemble a comb, hence the name. This is one that I do use to differentiate it from regular spiral binding. I don't know that most people care, particularly on these $8, $10, $12 community cookbooks, but I do use comb binding. eBay, interestingly, does not list it as one of their binding options. They occasionally, depending on the category, will have spiral bound, which you could use probably interchangeably here, but comb binding refers to plastic rather than metal wire round binding. Crease, a permanent bend to a page or a dust jacket, somewhat common from times when collectors used to remove the dust jacket and fold it for safe storage. When these jackets have been resurrected, they sometimes contain a crease. You see this a lot in paperback books where just through use and storage, particularly again along the edge of the spine where it's obviously been read multiple times, you'll see creasing. I do try to mention that in the description if there is a significant crease on the cover. And again, I try to rely on the photos to convey exactly how bad that might be. Crown, the very top edge of the spine. Generally, again, if there's damage there, which happens a lot, that's an area that gets a lot of wear because there's not a lot of support there. I'll just say at the top of the spine rather than the crown, again, assuming that people will not necessarily immediately understand what that term is. Cuts. This is one that I never use. Illustrations printed in the text pages are called cuts. Whole page illustrations that have printed separately are known as plates. I will occasionally use plates. Otherwise, I just call them illustrations. I'm so simple. Simple-minded guy, I guess. I don't know. TRB collectibles. Let's say you utilize specialized terminology incorrectly to an educated book buyer. You could be describing it incorrectly, which could lead to a return. So is being more simple with language safer? I would say yes. I believe that it is because, again, that buyer, while they may prefer to see the actual technical term used and used correctly, is going to understand when I say top of the spine or shelfware or whatever and use a more common term. And yes, if I have used the wrong word in the wrong place and the buyer is expecting one thing and gets something else, yes, you could end up with negative feedback or a return or some kind of issue where a customer is asking for a price adjustment or whatever. So again, this is just me. For my money, the simpler I can keep it, the better, the more comfortable I feel about the broadest audience understanding what they're going to get when the item finally arrives on their doorstep. Damp stained. Light stain on the cover or on the leaves of a book caused by moisture, such as a piece of food or perspiration, generally not as severe as water stains. This is another term I don't use. I will just say moisture staining and use a descriptor, mild, some, severe, whatever the case may be. Again, trying to keep it as simple as possible. Decal edges, another term for uncut or untrimmed edges. So sometimes, particularly on older books, you'll see that the edges of the pages appear really uneven. They were not exactly cut to be smooth. You'll find that on older books. It can be a way to help identify also book club edition books because they generally are on a little bit lower quality paper and are manufactured to a little bit lower quality standard, and they will sometimes have these decal edges. So that can be helpful in discovering a book club edition as well. Dents, damage to the edges of the cover of hardcover books. I will usually just describe it as impact damage or something like that. And again, point to the photos. Dog-eared, I think most people understand what this one is. Pages that have been folded over in the corners. Some readers do this to mark their place in a book. To be completely fair, I'm not looking at every page in a book. If there is a section that has clearly been folded over, I will try to take a photo of that. But if you've been a follower of this podcast and this channel for a while, you know I'm listing 100 to 120 items a week. I'm literally not looking at every page. I will scan through, flip through, looking for instances of things like highlighting and notations and any damage, water stains and whatnot. But I'm not looking at every single page. So I do probably occasionally miss these dog ears, which is another reason that I underpromise and overdeliver. A book that's probably good, I list as acceptable and hope that it passes muster at the end. Dust jacket, again, it's synonymous with dust wrapper, which is a term I almost never see today. It's the decorative paper wrap on a hardcover designed to protect the binding. If your hardcover book has a dust jacket, it inherently has more value, maybe not quite double, but certainly significantly more value, even if that dust jacket has chipping or damage or water stains or whatever. The mere fact that that dust jacket remains with the book increases the value of the book by, in some cases, a very significant margin. So I always try to mention, you'll see in my listings, I always mention, even in the title, if there's space, I will use the abbreviation HCDJ for a hardcover with its dust jacket so that a buyer would be able to tell pretty quickly that it comes with everything it should have. Edge worn, wear along the edges of hardback book covers. Again, I would just call that shelf wear. Edition, this is one where there's a lot of confusion. All the copies of a book printed from the same plates or typesetting. Editions, changes, and revisions are made with each new editions, which are generally known as second edition, third edition, reprint editions, revised editions, and all that sort of thing. It can be difficult at times to tell which ones are which. I, for my part, generally err on the side of caution. If I don't know for sure what edition of the book I have in my hands, I don't mention it at all. And I value it as though it is just a common edition, not anything special. End papers. This is one that you see. You will see some people call these end pages. These are the sheets of paper posted into the inner covers that join the book block, which is the pages of the book, to the covers. One side of the sheet is pasted to the inside cover and the other is left free. These are almost always blank pages. This is a lot of times where you will see people who have put those stickers or have written their name on the book. Again, I always try to take a picture of those. And in a lot of cases, I find, again, particularly on older books, that in some cases these have been removed. And this is where there will be some separation because that's part of what's holding the book together. And I will say front end paper missing, front end paper damaged, separation at front end paper. So I will use that term, again, accompanied with photos. Erosion. This is not one that you naturally think of with books, so I don't use this one. Loss of paper or cloth caused by a slow and steady wear as opposed to chipping or tearing. This, for me, again, is just shelf wear. That is the obvious answer to this. If it's got fading and parts where the cover has been rubbed smooth or rubbed away, that, for me, is just shelf wear. Errata. So this is an interesting one. Mistakes or errors generally encountered in the term errata slip, which is a small sheet of paper laid into a book by a publisher who discovered errors in the book prior to it being published. I have had in the past several books that have come, in some cases really old books, like 1920s era books that have had errata slips, sheets in them that had 2 or 3 things on them referring to a particular page where there is a mistake. The books are already printed. They're not going to scrap however many thousand books. So they will just print out these sheets of errata slips and put them in the books. If they've got those increase the value of the book. It's an interesting piece that should have been with the book originally. And if I find them, I value that book more highly because it's got something that most of your competitors probably do not. Ex-library. This happens a lot. A term used to indicate a book was once in a public library. Ex-library books are usually identified with 1 or more markings. I can attest to the fact that it's almost always more. Oh, man, it is going to be a lot. There's generally a sticker or something written or printed on the spine, on the outside of the cover. The corner may be cut off of the cover. There may be a stamp on that. There may be a stamp on the front end paper. There probably is a stamp on either the half title or the title page. There's a library card in the back. There's all kinds of ways that indicate that the book was in the library. And I will always disclose, because it's going to be obvious in the pictures, that it's ex-library. Frequently, they're marked as discarded or withdrawn when sold by the library. You'll almost always see some kind of stamp that says either withdrawn, discarded, no longer the property of library XYZ, so that the customer knows that you didn't just take this out of the library and decide to sell it. Ex libris, a book plate printed with the owner's name or initials, Latin for from the library of. So this is kind of like what we talked about earlier, the sticker, but these are pre-printed with the owner's name and or initials. Fading, the color of some book covers fade or become less intense when exposed to light. I see this a lot on dust jackets where the book has been in a shelf for years and years and years, and you pull it out and the spine is significantly lighter from having been exposed to light for years and years and years than the rest of the cover. I will always mention that in my listings that the dust jacket has fading, or if it's on the cover itself, which happens a lot on older books with no dust jackets, where again, the edge of the spine is, you see, even when I talk, I don't use the right terms, has been faded by light. I will mention that. First edition. This is generally used by book dealers and collectors to mean the first appearance of a work or book or pamphlet in form in its first printing. So let's see if I've got one here. So this one, if you can see it on the screen, I've got a copy of a copyright page, and down here towards the bottom, it says first trade edition. In a lot of cases, a book will say first edition, first American edition, first British, whatever printing it might be. It may say specifically first edition. That is pretty much the only time that I will call my listings first edition in the listing. I'm looking for that. Or as you can see down below, it may say first printing. This is one way to identify on more contemporary books, at least first printing. You'll see this series of numbers. Sometimes there will be two series of numbers. They may be 2 digits. Generally, the 2-digit ones look like they're higher numbers, 80s, 90s, double zeros. Those are the years that the book was printed. But this 1 through 10, whatever the lowest number that appears here generally refers to what printing it is. So this one is a first edition, first printing. If this number was not here and you only had a 2, that would be a second printing. This obviously does not apply to older books that didn't use this kind of terminology and this kind of indication. So again, unless it says specifically first printing or first edition, I try to avoid that term, again, for the reason that TRB Collectibles mentioned, because I don't want to have something come back because I misrepresented it out of just sheer not knowing for sure. First, thus, I have never seen this term anywhere. It means not a first edition, but something that is new. It may be revised, have a new introduction by the author or someone else, maybe the first publication in paperback form or first by another publisher. I will generally say first Penguin edition. Whoever the new published Bantam books is really good for that. If you look at old Bantam paperbacks, they a lot of times will actually have a printing history that shows it was first printed by Doubleday Books in year X, and then it was printed by someone else, and then it'll say first Bantam edition 1973 or whatever. And then it may have those numbers across the bottom so you can tell even what printing it is. So that can be really helpful. First, thus, I have no intention of ever using it. I have never seen actually on any other listing, and I have looked at thousands of book listings over the years doing research. I'm going to jump back into the chat here real quick. Big Dre bought 20 books on the weekend at a few Goodwills for $1 each. Sold one 2 days ago for 20 bucks plus shipping. There you go. My sourcing day was cut short as I got stranded at the third Goodwill and had to get towed. That is the worst. I had that happen once. I was at a garage sale. I was 50 odd miles from my house. And I bought a bunch of stuff at this garage sale, loaded it in the SUV. I was so happy with my buy. Started the car up and went to put it in gear, and the shift lever would not move. A bushing had broken in the linkage, and I could not get it into gear and had to get towed. So sorry that happened to you. That's the worst. You think you've made a good lick, and then you got to get the car fixed. Playroom. Oh, hey, I took some book photos. Do you always send things media mail? I need to update my policy or something to get my media mail back. Do you have monetary limits a book must hit to list? Okay. So I just had this conversation actually with someone in the comments of another video I did. I'm going to continue to list books as shipping by media mail for the foreseeable future. But as I talked about in the Monday episode, there's no price increase coming for Ground Advantage, which is going to put, in a lot of instances, Ground Advantage into play. The only time where it's going to be a problem is because the Ground Advantage still uses postal zones. Some zones will be more expensive. For instance, a 4-ounce package from where I'm at here in Ohio to California, today at least, is still cheaper to ship by media mail. As of July 14th, that may not be the case. And as I talked about when I was on Katie Reed's show, I will switch it over to whatever looks like the fastest and most economical shipping method. So I did that today. I had a book where the buyer was fairly close to me. They had paid $4.13 for media mail shipping. Shipping it to them actually by Ground Advantage was $3.96. So I saved whatever that is, 16 cents on the shipping. The buyer's getting faster service, in theory at least, and you're getting $100 worth of free insurance by using Ground Advantage. So yes, I will continue at least for the short term to list everything as media mail, but I will ship it by whatever the best method appears to be. And as I talked about way back when they announced the next round of media mail price increases, I'm not completely convinced that media mail is going to be around for forever, especially as the prices continue to converge. It becomes less and less necessary. And at that point, we're all essentially going to be forced to switch. Media Picker, I'll be thrifting these weekends for those of you who have a half-price books near you. They're having a 20% off everything starting on Saturday. That's a good tip to know. The book I sold was the ARRL antenna book. I sell those all the time. Every time I can find those, they're generally like 5x7, 8x6 staple-bound paperback books about antennas and shortwave radio and that kind of stuff. I grab them all the time because you can usually buy a box of them for next to nothing and make pretty decent money on them. Always seek out first edition, first printings. Absolutely. That's where the money is. If you can find a first edition, first printing intact in good condition, those are always going to be the most valuable. To add on to at Playroom, you've talked about it on the pod, and I've thought a lot about it. I ship a ton of media mail, but Ground Advantage price is getting really close there. I think I just covered that. So I find Stephen King books very hard to figure out if they are first editions. Again, when in doubt, I don't call them that, particularly with things like that. Stephen King fans they know what is what. They know the years and the editions. I've got a friend whose partner is a big Stephen King fan, and she knows everything about those books, which dust cover should be with it, the whole nine. They're super fans, and trying to not necessarily pull one over, but just inaccurately through sheer ignorance, listing a book as something it's not is a problem. So I generally just try to avoid doing that. You shipped yes, I did. Yes, I did. Shipped it using Ground Advantage because it was quicker. And again, it was, I think in that case, it was like 16 or 18 cents cheaper. Would you allow both shipping options going forward so the buyer has a choice of the cheapest? Ground Advantage has that insurance. I do that right now with items over 1 pound. I offer both ground and priority. That may be something that I consider doing with media mail in the future. So good suggestion. Let's continue on here. We're only in the F's and we're already at like 35 minutes. Fly title. This is another term I've never seen. The page carrying nothing but the title of the book, usually preceding the actual title page. This is also known as sometimes the bastard title. Most frequently, it is referred to as the half title page. It's generally the page after the end paper and maybe one other blank sheet, and then it is a sheet that literally just has the title on it. No dates, no author, no nothing, just the actual title of the book. Foxed and foxing, brown spots of the paper caused by a chemical reaction generally found in 19th century books, particularly in steel engravings of the period. I have found this on plates, photos in books as recently as the 1960s. And again, to show you an example of what that looks like, this page here, you can see these little kind of tannish, orangish spots all over the book. That is what's called foxing. When I see that in a book, I will generally describe it as foxing or age-related foxing, which is generally what has caused this. These are, generally speaking, much older books. So that is actually a term that I will use that may, in fact, be over a lot of people's heads, but it is, I guess you could just say staining, but that conjures up a whole nother realm of things. So I do actually use the term foxing. Frontis or frontispiece. This is an illustration at the beginning of the book, usually facing the title page. Sometimes it's the only illustration in the book. It's often a quite ornate painting or drawing depicting either characters in the book or something that happens in the book. Don't see it a ton. on newer books, but this was fairly common on older and antique books. Gilt, thin application of gold decoration or lettering has been applied, can be applied anywhere. It can be on the boards, on the spine, or as we talked about earlier, even on the edges. Gilt edges, application of gilt to the edges. This would be a case where if it wasn't on all edges, you would just say gilt edge, gilt top, whatnot. Gutter, the inner margin of the leaves of a bound book. So when you open the book, that kind of what looks like the seam, the gap, the valley between the pages is what's known as the gutter. Generally, again, book club editions will have what has become known as a gutter code. So somewhere in the last maybe dozen pages of the book, generally my experience has been in that section down low on the page in the gutter, you'll see a code, a 3-4 letter code. And that typically only happens in my experience with book club editions. So if you see someone, I will, for instance, with that Stephen King Bachman Books thing, it had a gutter code. There are several different editions of that have different gutter codes. So I put that gutter code in the title and in the description to differentiate it potentially from other books, other printings of that book. So, but that's what the gutter is. Half binding, a book in which the spine and the corners are bound in a different material. Frequently it's leather than the rest of the covers. Again, not something you see a ton today, but older books, late 1800s through kind of the mid 1900s on a particularly higher end books, you'd see that quite a bit. Half title page, we just talked about the page carrying nothing but the title of the book preceding the title page. Highlighting, pretty straightforward, the use of transparent and brightly colored markers to draw attention to particular text, frequently done by students. See also underlining. This is something that in my flipping through the book, if I see it, I always note it in the description. And a book that has that should probably never be rated higher than acceptable. So in a case like this, I will draw attention to the fact that there is minimal highlighting and underlining, some significant, lots of highlighting and underlining as shown in photos. And then if the book is otherwise in really great physical condition, I will say book is in acceptable condition due to extensive highlighting and underlining or notations, but is otherwise in good physical condition. So that, again, the buyer is clear that the reason I'm rating the book as acceptable is because of these particular issues, not because the thing is fallen apart. Hinge, the inside portion of the flexible area where the book cover meets the spine, often used in conjunction with the term joint, which describes the exterior portion. So a lot of times you'll see splitting and separation at the hinges, or they'll be, again, cockeyed. They'll be a little warped from improper storage. Hinge is what that's referring to. Again, I would probably be more inclined to just say that that's part of the cover, but that is the technical term there, is hinge. Illumination. This is actually on eBay, and to be completely fair, I never knew what this term meant until I saw this in this glossary. Decoration applied by hand in gold, silver, or colored paint. So in the book, rather than just an illustration, if it's been applied by hand in gold, silver, or paint, it is called an illumination. So score one for the good guys. I did not know that previously. Illustrated, sometimes abbreviated ILL, ILLS, ILLUS. I do this in my titles. If the book is illustrated, I will try to squeeze in that fact with an abbreviation, a design, picture, plate, plan, diagram, chart, or map printed within the text. Illustrations for me refers to any of those things. I see a lot of sellers that if a book is full of photos and charts and graphs, they will not check or call it illustrated. There's a perception that illustrated refers only to like line drawings or paintings or something like that. For my money, if a book has a chart, a graph, a painting, a diagram, a drawing, a picture, a plate, any of that, I consider that book to be illustrated. For my purposes, again, I think the common buyer of a book would consider those to be illustrations. Impression, a much misused term, but one that, when accurately employed, means the number of copies printed during any given press run. Sometimes you'll see, particularly on older books, they will call a book a second impression or a third impression, and that for most people, I think implies that it's not a first printing. This is a later printing, potentially of the same edition of the book, but it's a different impression. Don't see it commonly used today. Inscribed usually indicates a book signed by the author with a personalized message, either with an inscription to a specific person. Appreciate your attending my book signing, Neil Gaiman. Or bearing some brief notation along with his signature. So you'll see that a lot. Sometimes they're just signed. There's just a signature. That can be an autographed book, but if there is a message, it's actually considered an inscription, and the book is inscribed. Again, that is something in eBay's item specifics where there is actually a checkbox for that. Joint we just kind of talked about, that is the flexible portion of the book on the outside edge of the cover. Large print. These books can be surprisingly valuable because there's just not a lot of them out there. A book printed with large type for the visually impaired. There are a handful of people who print specifically just do large print versions of books. If I've got one, if I find one, I almost always grab it because they're in such short supply. Large print books is exactly what it sounds like, but they can bring extra value. Leaf, a single sheet in a book. Each leaf contains 2 printed pages. Generally, if I have an issue with a page, I will just refer to the page number. I don't call it a leaf. Again, I don't think a lot of folks would understand what that is. Library binding, reinforced bindings used by many public libraries. A lot of libraries will pay to have books put in special extra hard cover bindings. You see this a lot probably in the 50s through the 70s, where there'll be some kind of funky decoration on the cover, geometric patterns and whatever, and it is visibly thicker than what you would expect from a normal hardcover because it's going to be in a junior high or elementary school library, and it's going to be exposed to potentially excessive wear and tear. I will always denote these in the description that it is a library binding. Some people specifically seek out books with library binding, so they can be kind of valuable. Limited edition, a book whose publication is deliberately restricted to a comparatively small number of copies, usually numbered and often signed by the author and or illustrator. I don't see a ton of limited edition books, but a lot of times they will say specifically that they are, in fact, limited edition. Marbled, paper or bindings decorated with an imitation marble pattern. Again, something you don't see a ton on contemporary books, but books of the bygone era, late 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of times will have those marbled decorative edges. Another one I do not use, marginalia, notes written in the margins of a page around the text, frequently used by students and others when studying a text. I will just call those notations. Mass market paperback, the most common paperback book, generally 4 inches wide, 7 inches high. See a lot of mystery, science fiction, and romance. This is actually not in eBay's checklist of item specifics as an option. They just have trade paperback and paperback. A lot of sellers will use mass market paperback. They'll put it in manually. I generally will just refer to them as paperbacks. Misbound, pages or signatures sewn together in an improper order. Sometimes these can be collectible. I've had a few instances where I've had a book where the pages are generally in bundles, and sometimes the bundles are just misaligned. They're in the wrong order in the book. As a collector, if you want some random, unusual thing, a misbound book can be kind of interesting. Monograph. This is a work generally short, dealing with a single subject, usually issued in a pamphlet form. Sometimes you will see collections of monographs where it will say, I've seen like old textbooks, a monograph on some subject, and there will be multiple different essays and monographs within a actual hardcover book. If it's essentially, for me, if it says monograph on the cover, I will call it that in the listing, but otherwise I try to stay away from that term as well. No date. No date of publication mentioned within the book. This happens a lot. Again, particularly on older books, there will be no dates anywhere, and it makes it really difficult to judge when a book was printed. You can get some feel based on, kind of the fonts and the type styles and the style and design of the cover, but it's very difficult to accurately determine the date that book was printed if there's no publication date. You could, if it was a more expensive book, I would probably go to the trouble of doing some research to try to find out, hey, when was this book by author X originally published? Maybe try to find some other listings or some photos that give me some kind of better idea. But on the generic book that I'm going to sell for 10 or 15 bucks, if it's not dated, it will go in my description as an undated edition. Let's jump back over here real quick to the chat. I think I did this one. Yes. Completely agree with using more common terms since you need to relate to your larger buyer pool. Yes. Again, if I was selling, for instance, on Abe Books where there is a more dedicated high-end book buyer there, it might be a different story. If I'm selling, again, that $8 science fiction novel on eBay or Mercari, I don't want to risk losing that person. Yes, please don't forget to like. I always forget to ask. If you're getting something out of this, please do me a favor and hit that like button. I would appreciate it. When you're sourcing, what genre would you say you buy the most to flip? I don't know that there is one. I always look for old, I talk about it on my What Sold segments all the time, old religious books, old like engineering and metallurgy books seem to do really, really well. I like buying big lots of old like pulp science fiction, the like 1950s and 60s era sci-fi paperbacks. I can generally get them for a quarter or 50 cents a piece in bulk, and they sell for anywhere from $5 to $100, depending on what it is. I had a Philip K. Dick book that I bought for a quarter once in a big lot that was worth $100. So those are kind of things I look for. Religion for me is always a go-to. When I go to a library sale, religion is the first section I go to. Other than that, vintage. I want to look at old books. So number one, I'm not competing with the Amazon FBA scanners that are trying to find value for their niche. They can't scan a book from 1920, so they pretty much ignore them. So that's an area where I can go in and make some hay. Also, out of all the books you list, what percent would you say do not have a comparable sold comp? A comparable sold comp, probably quite a few, because I will list a book because I'm a big believer in long tail, even if I don't see any sold comps, and I will just comp it against current listings and kind of hope for the best. Media books in particular for me is a numbers game. If there are no sales in the last 2 or 3 years and tomorrow Joe, the book guy, gets on and he's looking for a particular book that I just happened to have listed 6 weeks ago, and I've got the most competitive price and the best looking listing, I make a sale. So it happens a lot where I don't find actual sold comps, but that does not prevent me from listing the book. Still getting familiar with sci-fi, but have found some good ones. Yeah, there is definitely a market out there. Someone asked earlier, and I don't think I addressed it. They asked, is there a minimum amount that I will list for? And I've talked about that previously on the show, but generally, I feel like if I can't get a listed price of $4.99 plus shipping on a book, I'm probably not going to bother listing it. I will generally list those as best offer and accept offers sometimes down as low as $3. But that obviously depends on what my cost of goods sold was for that book or for that lot of books. Again, like in the case of the old science fiction books, if I bought 1,000 of them for 25 cents a piece, I can sell them as cheap as $3 plus shipping, and even after fees, still make a little bit of money. And I generate daily activity on my eBay store. It's not big money, but it's constant cash flow, and it's almost all profit. So yes, I will list generally down to about $4.99 plus shipping. Pricing it based on the competition. Yes. If there's no sold comps and I look and there are, say, 3 or 4 of a particular book that are listed, and they might range from $8 or $10 up to $100 because people don't pay much attention. They see 2 or 3 and they list it overvalued. In some cases, I will go to a site like Abe Books or go to Amazon to see what comps are there. I've done that numerous times where there will be one book listed on eBay and it's $79.99, and I'll go to 8 books and there are a dozen of them listed for $15.99. I will list mine on eBay, maybe for $17.99 or best offer with a lowest acceptable offer of $15, and use that as my comp. So, but yes, I always look at the condition. Especially if there are photos, or if there are no photos, I generally just ignore those comps. If you didn't take the time to put a picture of your actual book up, I'm not competing with you because I've got 12 or 15 pictures. You can tell what my book is, what the quality of it is, and so on. So yes and no. Thank you. Let's get back to these terms. Original boards, the original binding that the book was published in, as opposed to contemporary binding or rebound. I'm going to take a quick drink here. It can be difficult to tell, but in a lot of cases, it will be really obvious that a book has been rebound. I don't think most buyers, again, at our level, have any inkling what an original board is, but if the book appears to have been rebound, I will always mention it. Out of print, sometimes abbreviated as OOP or OP, the book is no longer being printed. It is worth noting that an OOP book can be brought back into print at any time. That is true, but it would not be the same version, same edition. If you've got a to go back to the comment earlier, you got a first edition, first printing of a book that's out of print. If it comes back into print, that new book is not a first edition, first printing of a book. It's no longer out of print. You might want to remove that from your listing, but that book is still going to have value. So it does happen from time to time, but out of print books are obviously, again, depending on the supply of them in the marketplace, can be pretty valuable. Panel, the front or back of a dust jacket as opposed to the spine or the flaps. That's getting really technical. So the dust jacket has a front, a back, a spine, and then, of course, the flaps that insert inside the cover of the panel is that front or back section. I will usually just say front or back of the dust jacket. Perfect binding. This is used in paperback books, trade paperbacks, and magazines that have too many pages to actually be stapled. The page edges are glued together and then placed in the covers. It's a less expensive process than traditional book binding and stapling. This is not a term that shows up on eBay in their item specifics, but you will see listings from time to time where the seller has put in perfect binding. I, again, would avoid that term because I don't think most people would understand when they say, when they see the term perfect, they're going to just think the book is in immaculate condition, and you run the risk of potentially a return if you've used this term correctly, but the customer doesn't actually understand it. That could be a problem. So I avoid that term, but you will see that. Plates, whole page illustrations printed separately from the text. Illustrations printed in the text pages, as we talked about earlier, are called cuts. Older books specifically, sometimes even on the title page, it'll say with 16 color plates or whatever, and that would be probably the only time I would call those anything other than photos or illustrations. Price clipped. This comes up a lot. Price has been cut off from the corner of the dust jacket. So that book is probably either a promotional book or a book that has been marked out of stock by a distributor or a publisher or even a bookstore. So they cut the corner off of the dust jacket and cut the price off to indicate that it should not be sold or accepted as a full price item. True book collectors will ask that question. It's one of the reasons if I see that the corner has been clipped on the dust jacket, I always take a photo of that, because it is a question that you will get asked from time to time. Is it price clipped? Is it corner cut? Is the dust jacket cut? But that's what that's referring to. And those are almost always library books, markout books, promotional books, and in theory will have less value because of that. Printing, another word for impression. We've already talked about that a little bit. First printing, second printing, and so on. The earlier the printing, the more valuable the book is. Really, the only one that essentially matters is first printing. Anything after that, those values tend to lump together quite a bit. First edition, first printing are always the gold standard. Prior owner's signature, last person to own the book wrote their name in it. I will just write that the customer's name is wherever it is on generally it's on the end paper. Private press. I do come across this from time to time. A small press, often operated by one person, usually devoted to the production of small quantities of finely printed books. You will see sometimes companies will do this. I've got one right now where a bank asked for a private in-house printing of a book to give to employees. So private press, you will see that from time to time. Privately printed refers to a book or pamphlet whose printing was paid for by an individual group, like the bank, and which is meant for private circulation rather than public sale. Proofs. This precedes the published version of the book. Normal course of events would be a galley proof, an uncorrected bound proof, and an advanced reading copy bound in some kind of wrap. Sometimes you'll see these. I've picked these up at estate sales, and some collectors are interested in super early versions of a book and uncorrected proof or whatnot, so they can have some value. I don't hesitate to pick those up. Publication date. The book, a date is formally placed on sale. Reading copy. This is one that I will use for a book that's worn. A complete and readable copy of a book that is worn or used to such a degree that it is not considered to be collectible. If there are books that I see that, again, to go back to the comps conversation, the book itself has high value, but the one I've got is in pretty rough shape, I will price it accordingly and call it a good reading copy, not collectible. Reback, the book that has been repaired or replaced by replacing the spine and mending the joints. So again, a book that's been rebound in some way. If you can tell that that is the case, you probably want to disclose that in your listing. Recased, a book that has been glued back into its covers after having been shaken loose. I used the example earlier of a book that is placed into a box or a tote, spine up, and gravity has pulled the book block away from the binding and someone has re-glued it together. That is technically recased. I would probably say the book has been repaired or re-glued. Rebound, we've talked about when the boards of a book have been replaced. This can occur as a result of damage or because the owner simply likes the new boards better. If you've been following me for a while, you know I had a series of books from I think it was the mid to late 1800s that the previous owner had bound in custom leather bindings, so they all matched. They were really nice looking books, but they had been rebound, and that was something that I disclosed in the listing. Rejointed, the book has been repaired, preserving the original covers, including the spine, but those joints have been fixed. Remainder, this is again kind of like a closeout term. When a book has ceased to sell, the publisher may get rid of his overstock by remaindering the title to booksellers, generally at a discount, who specialize in selling this kind of book. They almost always will have some kind of remainder mark on them. In a lot of cases, it is just a black mark across the bottom edge, the foot of the pages. I see from time to time where some sellers will actually sand that off, remove the remainder mark. That's not something I do. Reprint, a subsequent press run of an edition of a book. Usually the text remains unchanged for each reprint, but may be updated for a new edition. In a lot of cases, those will specifically say new and enlarged, revised edition, or something like that. But if a book has been reprinted for some reason, that is the term. Rubbing, we talked about this right at the beginning. Wear to the edges of the book or dust jacket as a result of shelf friction. Shelfware, folks. It's just shelfware. As is this one. Scuffed, like rubbed, but more damage has occurred. Minor shelfware, significant shelfware. Again, I try to keep it as simple as possible. Series, a group of volumes with a common theme issued in succession by a particular publisher. The Harry Potter series. It's a series of books, volumes in a row that tell a single coherent story. Here's one again I had not really heard of. Shadow, a discoloration of a leaf or cover caused by the use of stickers, tape, etc. The discoloration can be caused by a chemical reaction from the adhesive or from a difference in sun exposure, sometimes referred to as tape shadow or sticker shadow. You'll see this a lot of times, particularly on old library books, where they have taped like a mylar cover of some kind over the dust jacket and then taped it to the inside of the board. And that tape has, of course, over years, the adhesive has gone away, the tape has fallen off, and you've got this brownish orange residue that's left. That's what they're referring to here. Shaken, an adjective describing a book whose pages are beginning to come loose from the binding. Again, a case where the book has been improperly stored in a lot of cases and it's just pulled away from the binding. My favorite, shelfware. The wear that occurs as a book is placed onto and removed from the shelf may be to the tail, which is the bottom edge of the cover as they rub against the shelf, to the dust jacket or the exterior of the covers when no dust jacket has been present as the book rubs against its neighbors, or to even the head of the spine, which some people use to pull the book from the shelf. So shelfware is kind of the catch-all when accompanied particularly by a lot of good photos. Signed, a book that the author has autographed. Pretty straightforward, but it's different from an inscription because there's no message attached to it. Slipcase. You see this a lot with old like Heritage Press books. They did like a reprint editions of classic novels in really nice ornate covers. The Folio Society does these as well. And then they put them in this cardboard case, which is generally covered either with cloth or some kind of nice artwork that holds the book so that only the spine is exposed. If I've got the slipcase, I always try to mention it in the title, in the description, in the item specifics. I will add that as a feature. And then, of course, take photos of that. And again, I'll use the same descriptors as I would for the book. The slipcase has shelfware and minor damage, shelfware and light staining, whatever the case may be. So, sliver, a small narrow chip, nick, or tear, usually at the edge of a dust jacket. That's a tear. In Galaxy Land, that's a tear. Soiling, a gathering of dust or dirt, usually caused by handling. Pretty straightforward. Generally, I would just refer to that probably as staining because it's very difficult. It's a book I don't own, so I don't know how it came to be that way, so I would just call it staining. Spine, as we've discussed, the book's backbone where the signatures are gathered. The spine is covered with the back strip. I think for a lot of folks, those terms are probably interchangeable. Spiral bound, we talked about with comb bound, a book that is held together at the spine by a metal or plastic spiral, which is threaded through holes that are punched through the leaves or the pages. Square, you will get customers that will ask, again, particularly the bibliophiles, people that are book collectors, if the book is square, and that's a book which has kept its original shape and shows no rounding of the spine. So it is solid, it is as square and straight as it would have been, no warping, no sagging, none of that. You will get collectors, particularly on older books, who may ask if the book is square, and that's what they're asking about. Sunned or sunning, faded from exposure to light or direct sunlight. Again, I would just call that fading. A lot of these words, if I have to use another word that's more descriptive to cover what that word is, I'm going with the easy word. Tanning. This is one I get asked about a lot. So going back to the pictures here, here is a picture of whatever it is, a dozen different pages of different books with different levels of tanning. So these are pages that over the years, you'll sometimes see it referred to as browning, where the pages have begun to discolor and tan. They're turning brown or light brown or beige or whatever the case may be. Sometimes you will only see it along the edges, not on the full page, but that's what tanning is referring to. As I said, you may see it referred to as browning. I've seen it referred to by some sellers as toning, which again to me is a term that is too vague. Tanning it's pretty clear for most people in their head that it's going to have some level of discoloration that is brown. And I will usually try to describe it as light tanning, mild tanning, significant tanning, well-tanned pages to give some kind of adjective to attach to that. So again, in conjunction with the photos, someone will know exactly what they're getting. Tight. The binding of a new book is very tight. That is, the book will not open easily and generally does not want to remain open to any given page. As the book is used, the binding becomes looser until a well-used book may lay flat and remain open to any page in the book. That is another one you may get a question from a potential buyer, is the binding tight? And that's what they're referring to. If you tried to open it up and set it on the table, what would it do? And if it would tend to fold itself back towards closed, you can be assured that the binding is reasonably tight. Tipped in. This means a plate, autograph letter, or photo is usually attached to the book, but is not integral to the binding. You'll see this particularly on some paperback books where you've got the cover and there'll be like a cutout on the cover, and then the next page is the same material as a cover with a different graphic on it. That's called a tip-in. And obviously the hole in the front cover exposes part of that second picture to the front. The V.C. Andrews books are an example. If you've ever seen any of the V.C. Andrews books, some of them have a tip-in in them where there is some kind of cutout on the cover that exposes a picture underneath. Not all of them. Some of them, and particularly later printings, first printings of the paperback will have that tip-in, and the other ones will just have whatever that image is actually on the cover, and there will not be that second page. So that's what they're referring to there. I have had customers that have actually asked that question. They reach out and said, does this book have a tip-in? Title page. We talked about the title page near the beginning of the book. Generally lists the title, subtitle if there is one, the authors, editors, other contributors, the publisher or the printer, sometimes both. Sometimes also the place and date of publication. The title page information should be used for cataloging, not the half title page or the cover. So whatever is on the title page is the actual title of the book. And you will see that from time to time. I did some books yesterday, actually, that the title that was on the dust jacket on the cover did not match the title that was on the spine, and neither of those matched what was actually on the title page of the book, which is nuts to me. But that's what they're referring to there. Let me hop back into this chat, which has gotten out of control, which I appreciate very much. I'm not knocking it. Just to be clear, let's get down here. Okay. Brian Henry, we use the as shown term with a lot of picks too, not just for books. Yes, I use it for everything. Also like shelfware for the same reasons, especially for new old stock products that's been unopened and still sealed. Absolutely. Again, being as clear and concise as possible eliminates as much opportunity for potential misunderstanding, which can lead to returns or bad feedback or requests for price adjustments. So making it as easy for people to understand as possible is always my goal. Been following just a little while. I remember when you used to call it the Hot Wheels Cave. Yeah, it's been a lot of, I'm in a different room in the basement now. It was the Bat Cave for a while because I had a Batman graphic up on the wall. And then it was the Hot Wheels showroom. And now I'm just in a studio with what amounts to moving blankets all around me for soundproofing. Used to see comb-bound books for electronic service manuals. Absolutely. Test equipment, it allowed for corrective page changes from the maker as needed, but was never easy to swap as a 3-ring. Absolutely. They're a lot of work if you want to change a page. You can do it, but it's a battle. Comb bindings do require a bit more care when shipping. Since old bindings tend to break, I usually box them for shipping. I will generally wrap them in a layer of bubble wrap and then put a cardboard support in it, and then it goes in a bubble mailer. I've never had any that come back damaged, but a box obviously would eliminate that potential problem as well. But yes, they can be a little more difficult to get to their destination in good shape. Trimmed, an adjective indicating that the pages have been cut down to a size smaller than when originally issued. You'll find this sometimes if a book has been rebound, where the new binding maybe is a little bit smaller and the pages would have hung over the edge. It's not something that you'll see a ton of, but that's what they're referring to there. True first, the correct first edition for any given title, usually denoted by the original country of origin, the earliest publishing date. You may also see this referred to in listings as stated first printing or stated first edition. If it's on that copyright page, I'm obviously quite confident that that's what that actually is. So I would call that either a stated or a true first edition. I see sellers who are listing books that are not true first printings and first editions as first editions. I don't want to be that guy. So again, when in doubt, I err on the side of caution and don't call them that. Uncut, the pages of a completed book have not been shaved down to a uniform surface. That kind of goes back to the deckled pages that we talked about way hours and hours ago in this episode. But they've not been cut to a consistent. You see this a lot in older books, in particular where groups of pages have not all been trimmed evenly, and there'll be this kind of uneven pattern of pages kind of half sticking out of the cover. Underlining, pretty straightforward, using a pencil or pen to underline passages in a book to draw attention to the underlined text. Again, this is something that if I see it in the book, I will always mention it. There have been times where it's gotten by me. If it's a 500-page book, and as I'm flipping through the pages and scanning, maybe it's only on 1 or 2 pages, and those are pages I don't see, and I'll get a message back from a customer, and I'll usually try to take care of them in some way if I've missed that, because that's my mistake. It was an inaccurate listing, and we'll try to make it right. Volume, a single book in a series, volume 2 of 6. Again, I talked about this a few weeks ago. There are a lot of instances where you'll know a series of books should be 6 volumes or 8 volumes or whatever it is, and at the estate sale, 5 of the 6 or 7 of the 8 will be there. You can try to sell it as an incomplete set, or you can sell them as individual volumes. In a lot of cases, I've found that individual volumes tend to be more valuable because people have also gone to a sale and bought a collection that has 6 of the 7, and all they need is book 5. And if you've got it, and again, yours is in reasonable condition and it reasonably matches the condition of theirs, they don't want to buy 6 more to get the volume they need. They want that individual book, and they may pay a premium to get it. Wartime paper stock. During World War II, conservation of materials was encouraged, and publishers opted towards highly acidic, cheaper paper. Books made with this cheaper paper material tend to degrade faster and subsequently are harder to find in fine condition. These books are almost always, to go back to the term tanned, very significantly tanned. Those pages are bronze or dark brown. They're still readable. The pages can be a little brittle, but this old wartime paper stock, I see this a lot with books from like Grosset and Dunlap, Triangle Books, the Blackiston Company. They did a lot of reprints during that era of books that had been previously published, and it's all on this cheaper paper, and they are really, really bronzed. But that's because it's wartime paper stock, and they were under conservation requirements to print on cheaper paper. Water stain on a book cover or leaves from water or other liquids may cause discoloration and perhaps actual shrinking. Has also been known to be referred to as tide mark. Never seen that term. I will generally describe these again as moisture stains. I don't know if it's water. I don't know what caused it, but you can generally see this kind of wavy pattern on the actual paper and then a stain. Those are just moisture stains. Older books, you will sometimes see this, worming or wormholes, small holes resulting from bookworms, which are the larvae of various beetles. Don't see it a ton really on anything contemporary, post probably 1960. It's very rare for me to see it, but prior to that, you will, particularly older books, 20s and 30s eras, if they were not properly stored, you'll see these wormholes in them. I always mention it in the listing and try to take photos of some of them so that people know what they're getting. Hey, that's it. We're at the bottom. Woohoo! Where's my applause button? Oh my goodness. If you have been with me this whole time, thank you. You are a true champion. Again, as I said, if you're getting something out of this, please leave me that thumbs up, and I would appreciate it very much. This went way longer than I had anticipated. Let's go back over here to the chat and run through these again. So awesome. I caught your live. Watch your podcast at work. Hello, Flipper friends. Thanks you, Belle. I've watched something on your channel actually the other day. So congratulations on your book sales. If I can't tell the edition, I take a photo of the page with the print info and let the potential buyer decide if they care about the edition. Yeah, absolutely. When in doubt, I don't mention it. I'll take a photo of generally my photo process for those who care at all. Cover, spine, all the edges. Again, particularly if the flap on the dust jacket has been cut or there's any writing on the inside of the board or on the end paper, I'll take a picture of that. I'll take a picture of the full title page. I rarely take a picture of the half title page unless there's something, again, a sticker, a stain, something written on it. Take the full title page, the copyright page, sometimes, if I think it's relevant, the table of contents, and then a series of pictures of the actual pages of the book that might give a general sense of the condition. If there are illustrations, I always try to take a picture of an illustration so they're not just taking my word for it because I checked the checkbox for illustration. I'll try to show them a picture of an illustration, and that's how sometimes I end up with 18, 20 photos of a $8 book, which seems like overkill. But there's a quick hello and another one. Usually buy the missing one and complete it. Yeah. That's why I don't hesitate to buy and plus you can usually, again, at an estate sale, get them cheap. They don't, what else are they going to do with them? You've got 6 out of 7 books of a volume of books or whatever it is. Make them an offer. Hey, I'll take all 6 of these, but it's not a complete set. I'll usually bring it to their attention. Hey, you've got X number out of Y number here. It's not a complete set, so they're not worth what you've got on them. I'll give you whatever, 50 cents a book, $1 a book or whatever. They almost never say no to that. I've done that too with Pendragon series. Yep. Ex-library books. What do you call the heavy-duty rebindings that sometimes come on old ex-library books put there when the library would repair books? That was in that listing. It's called library bindings. And it's almost always obvious that they are something different. Again, it's much, much heavier. And typically, I wish I had a photo of one. They have some kind of ornate geometric pattern on them. They're almost always obvious as some sort of rebinding by the artwork and the fact that it's a much heavier binding, and that is a library binding. Lord Jake, you're still here. Thank you. TRB, thank you. I appreciate that. Hopefully people learned some stuff here. Got to go, but lovely chatting with you all. Happy book sales. Thank you very much. Lord Jake, I'm glad that you use more simple terms. I would be so confused on some of them. Yes, that is, again, as I said at the outset, the simpler I can keep things, whether I'm talking to you in a podcast or creating a listing, I really aim to have as many people understand what it is that I'm trying to say as possible to make it clear, to make sure there's no confusion or misinterpretation of what's being said or shown in the listing or in the communication. So while these technical terms are important and valuable probably to know as a bookseller, the use of them strategically probably makes sense, but using them just to use them, I'm not convinced is always a great idea. Could you do a step-by-step video guide us through the photo process of a book for listing? I've actually thought about that. Here's a story. So when my audio interface died a couple of weeks ago, I ordered a cheap one on Amazon to have as a backup in case the new good one that I ordered did not arrive in time to do a show. I've got that. I haven't even taken it out of the box yet. And I have thought about setting that up actually in the old Bat Cave, the Hot Wheels cave, with the PC that I use for shipping, and setting up a camera and a second kind of studio around my photo booth where I could potentially do one of these live shows and just do some listings, and you could see what my process looks like. I'm not quite in a position to invest yet in another camera, which I would need to make that work. But that is something that I'm considering. So stay tuned. Lord Jake Ryan, I've seen people use duct tape for binding. Yes, I've seen all kinds of random repairs to books. And those are generally, I feel like, have been done by whoever owned the book. I would like to hope it's not a bookseller that's trying to pass that off as a saleable book, or that they've done that repair in hopes of being able to sell it. If I make any kind of alteration to a book, if I've tried to re-glue the book box to the spine, I will always disclose that in my listings, because again, I don't want to run the risk of having something come back on me either through feedback or potentially a return. So disclosing all of that just makes good sense. Heck yeah, that would be awesome. So if you'd like to sign up for a membership to the YouTube channel, $4.99 a month, you get early access to the other 2 episodes, priority responses to whatever messages you leave in the comments. But that would help speed me along towards replacing a camera so that I could do that. That's shameless, isn't it? Miss Lachey, thank you so much. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks to everybody for hanging out. This was this took a lot longer than I anticipated, but hopefully it was worthwhile. Hopefully you got some good information out of it. The chat I always appreciate when you guys are here and you comment and you have questions. That makes this whole process for me much more worthwhile and much more enjoyable. So with that, man, it's lunchtime. If you're here in the Eastern time zone, it's time to eat. So let's wrap this up. Thank you again. If you're new here and you're not currently a subscriber and this is the kind of content that helps you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Consider giving me a like for this video if you enjoyed it or got something out of it. With that having been said, guys, it's time to sell. Thanks.